Have you ever wondered how on-screen couples have evolved from the silver screen's glamorous beginnings to today's more complex portrayals of love? From perfect pairs to the most unconventional duos, Hollywood's vision of romance has always captivated audiences. But what caused this shift? And how have these changes reflected society's ever-evolving views on love? In this video, we'll dive deep into the fascinating evolution of on-screen couples in Hollywood, exploring how their portrayals have changed throughout the decades. From the charming and often idealized couples of the Golden Age to the bold, sometimes controversial pairings we see today, Hollywood's depiction of romance has mirrored cultural shifts, societal norms, and the changing roles of men and women. Whether it's the classic chemistry between stars like Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy, or the modern, complex dynamics of today's leading couples, we'll uncover how these relationships not only entertained, but shaped the way we see love on screen. Get ready to see how love stories have grown, adapted, and captured our imaginations over time. The Golden Age of Hollywood. Classic love stories. The Golden Age of Hollywood, roughly from the 1930s to the 1950s, was a time of glamour, elegance, and idealized romance. In an era where the stars were larger than life, love on screen was often portrayed as pure, perfect, and unblemished by the messy realities of life. It was the golden standard of romantic storytelling. Couples were not only stunning but were also cast in roles that made love look effortless and timeless. The stars and their chemistry. Iconic on-screen couples like Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy, or Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, set the bar for what many considered the ideal romantic partnership. Their on-screen chemistry was undeniable, but what truly set these couples apart was the unspoken understanding and restraint they brought to their roles. In films like The Philadelphia Story, 1940, Hepburn and Tracy displayed a subtle yet electric connection, never overtly passionate but always charged with mutual respect and wit. Similarly, the dance numbers of Rogers and Astaire in films like Top Hat, 1935, showcased not just physical skill, but an elegant interplay of desire and restraint. One reason these romances appeared so chaste by modern standards was the presence of the Hays Code, a set of industry guidelines that regulated what could and couldn't be shown on screen. Under the Hays Code, any display of physical affection had to be modest, and topics like infidelity or sexual tension were often left to suggestion rather than explicit depiction. This led to a form of romance that was restrained, with a focus on wit, charm, and the will-they-won't-they tension rather than the more direct physical attraction we see today. The romantic stories of this era were also deeply rooted in the traditional gender roles of the time. The leading man was often the confident, suave figure. Think of Cary Grant or Clark Gable, while the leading lady played the role of the elegant, somewhat passive object of affection. These couples often followed the classic narrative of a man pursuing a woman, with the woman's ultimate goal being to fall in love and marry, reinforcing societal expectations of the time. Why did these romances work? The magic of these couples was not just in their performances, but in the idealization of love itself. In a world recovering from the Great Depression and on the brink of war, audiences longed for something pure, something that provided hope and escape. These romantic couples represented an unattainable, perfect world where love was always true, even if it was only on the big screen. But as time went on, people began to crave more than the fairy tale, something deeper, more relatable, and more complex. Were these on-screen romances a reflection of real-life relationships, or were they simply an idealized dream, designed to give audiences a glimpse of a perfect world? The 1960s, 1970s, breaking boundaries. The 1960s and 1970s were a time of radical change in both society and cinema. As the world shifted towards greater freedom and social change, the portrayal of on-screen couples reflected those transformations. The era marked a departure from the polished, idealized love stories of the Golden Age as filmmakers began to explore more complex, gritty, and sometimes controversial relationships. This was a time when love was no longer just about the perfect union. It was about real people with flaws, desires, and struggles. With the rise of the counterculture and the sexual revolution, the relationships on screen became more daring and reflective of the era's social shifts. Couples began to display more raw emotions, and love was no longer just about the perfect match. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton's tumultuous off-screen relationship translated to their iconic on-screen pairing in Cleopatra, 1963, where their chemistry was electric, but their issues bled into their performances. Their real-life love affair, full of drama and scandal, mirrored the passion and chaos they portrayed on screen, and it left audiences captivated. In the 1960s and 1970s, the traditional gender roles that had once governed love stories began to break down. Women on screen were no longer just the passive objects of desire. They began to take on more active, complex roles. Think of Barbra Streisand in Funny Girl, 1968, or Faye Dunaway in Chinatown, 1974. These women were no longer defined by their relationships with men. They had their agency, dreams, and ambitions. On the flip side, leading men like Marlon Brando in A Streetcar Named Desire, 1951, and Jack Nicholson in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 1975, portrayed more flawed anti-hero characters who were no longer the perfect, smooth-talking suitors, but instead reflected the complexities of real relationships. The influence of the sexual revolution. The sexual revolution played a major role in shifting how love and intimacy were portrayed in films. Movies like The Graduate, 1967, with Dustin Hoffman and Anne Bancroft, tackled themes of forbidden love and sexual experimentation, which were once taboo, but now became the heart of dramatic conflict. The idea that love could be messy, difficult, and sometimes even wrong, yet still deeply passionate, was a radical departure from the carefully constructed romances of the past. The rise of realism and anti-romanticism. During this time, filmmakers began to embrace realism. Love wasn't always perfect, and relationships didn't always end with marriage or happy endings. Movies like Bonnie and Clyde, 1967, showed a love story that was deeply connected to crime and rebellion, challenging traditional notions of what love should look like. The 1970s also saw the rise of more tragic or unconventional relationships, where the focus was on the emotional complexity of the characters rather than the external circumstances of their love. How did the real-life scandals and personal dramas of these stars influence the way we viewed on-screen love, and did this shift reflect a deeper societal change? The 1980s-1990s, from glamour to realism. By the 1980s and 1990s, the world had shifted yet again, and so had the way love was portrayed on screen. While glamour and escapism still had a place in Hollywood, there was a clear move towards more grounded, realistic portrayals of relationships. Audiences began to crave stories that felt more relatable and authentic, and filmmakers responded by moving away from the stylized, perfect love affairs of the past in favor of more complex, human, and sometimes messy love stories. It was an era of blending glamour with emotional depth, where the perfect romantic fantasy coexisted with the truth of personal struggles. The 1980s and 1990s saw the boom of romantic comedy, a genre that balanced romance with humor and real-world situations. Movies like When Harry Met Sally, 1989, and Pretty Woman, 1990 became cultural touchstones, showing relationships that were more down-to-earth than the sweeping romances of previous decades. In When Harry Met Sally, the relationship between Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan felt more like a friendship that slowly developed into love, reflecting the idea that true romance often starts with a strong foundation of mutual respect and shared history. This was a far cry from the idealized love stories of the past, where the romance seemed almost effortless. Throughout these decades, the on-screen couple began to take on more realistic forms. The chemistry between stars like Julia Roberts and Richard Gere in Pretty Woman wasn't just about looks or status. It was about two people from different worlds learning to connect on a human level. These relationships reflected real challenges, such as class differences, personal insecurities, and the complexities of building meaningful connections. The focus was less on perfection and more on the authenticity of the relationship, where both characters brought flaws and baggage to the table but still managed to find love. Alongside romantic comedies, the 1980s and 1990s also saw films tackling more serious themes within relationships. Movies like The English Patient, 1996, and Sleepless in Seattle, 1993, delved into grief, longing, and the heartache that comes with love. The characters in these films were not immune to heartache, personal loss, or emotional turmoil, and this made their relationships feel more genuine and relatable. The portrayal of love was not just about romantic gestures, but about dealing with life's hardships together. In The English Patient, for example, the romance between Ralph Fiennes and Kristen Scott Thomas was tragic, shaped by secrets and betrayals, showing that love could exist even in the most complicated and painful circumstances. Cultural shift and changing gender roles. The 1980s and 1990s also saw a change in how gender roles were portrayed in relationships. Women were no longer simply the damsels in distress or the objects of male desire. Instead, they were complex, self-assured individuals with their own goals and desires. In The First Wives Club, 1996, the female protagonists were unapologetically strong and independent, challenging the traditional portrayal of women as solely defined by their relationships. Men in these decades were also portrayed with more emotional vulnerability, as seen in Jerry Maguire, 1996, where Tom Cruise's character openly declares, "You complete me," acknowledging the emotional depth and complexity of romantic love. How did the portrayal of love and relationships in these decades challenge the traditional ideals of romance, and did it reflect a deeper understanding of the complexities of real life? The modern era, complex and diverse relationships. As we moved into the 21st century, the depiction of love and relationships on screen continued to evolve, becoming more inclusive, diverse, and complex. No longer limited to traditional romantic ideals or a specific set of gender roles, modern films began to showcase the full spectrum of human relationships, including various sexual orientations, cultural backgrounds, and non-traditional dynamics. What had once been a world of idealized love stories is now a place where characters experience a broader range of emotions and challenges, reflecting the diverse realities of the audience. The modern era saw a push towards portraying a variety of romantic relationships that reflected the changing fabric of society. Films like Brokeback Mountain, 2005, broke barriers by telling the story of a same-sex romance between two cowboys, played by Heath Ledger and Jake Gyllenhaal. It was a bold portrayal of love, exploring themes of forbidden attraction, societal constraints, and internal conflict, showing audiences that love transcends gender and societal expectations. Similarly, films like Moonlight, 2016, provided an intimate portrayal of a Black, gay man's journey to self-acceptance and love, offering a sensitive and nuanced take on relationships that had previously been underrepresented in Hollywood. In the modern era, love stories are no longer just about the joy of falling in love. Instead, films have embraced the messy, complicated aspects of romance: unfaithfulness, long-term commitment struggles, and navigating personal issues within a relationship. Movies like Marriage Story, 2019, and Blue Valentine, 2010, explore the breakdown of relationships, showing that love doesn't always last forever, and that the path to romance is not always smooth. These films dive into the emotional complexity of relationships, portraying both the deep connection and the pain that can come with it. The notion of happily ever after has evolved. In films like 500 Days of Summer, 2009, the typical romantic storyline is deconstructed, showing that not all relationships are meant to end in marriage or a perfect conclusion. The film follows the ups and downs of a romantic relationship, illustrating that love can be fleeting but still impactful. It speaks to the idea that love is often a journey, not a destination, something that resonates with modern audiences who are less likely to expect their relationships to fit into a predefined mold. The digital age has also influenced how modern relationships are portrayed. Movies like Her, 2013, where Joaquin Phoenix falls in love with an AI operating system, tackle the role of technology in modern relationships. In this case, love transcends human boundaries, raising questions about the nature of connection and intimacy in the digital era. Social media, online dating, and long-distance relationships have also become integral parts of modern romantic stories, as seen in films like The Perfect Date, 2019, and To All the Boys I've Loved Before, 2018, which explore how technology shapes love in the 21st century. One of the most significant changes in the modern era is the increased representation of LGBTQ+ couples, interracial relationships, and different family structures. Movies like Love, Simon, 2018, The Half of It, 2020, and Crazy Rich Asians, 2018, show that love can be experienced in many different ways, breaking free from the traditional one-size-fits-all approach to romance. These films highlight how diverse backgrounds, sexual orientations, and cultural contexts shape love, making these stories more inclusive and reflective of the world as it is today. In a world where relationships are more diverse than ever, how has the portrayal of love in films helped shape our understanding of romance in the modern era? As we've seen, the evolution of on-screen couples has transformed love stories from simple fairy tales to complex, inclusive, and diverse narratives. But what's next for romance in cinema? With technology, representation, and shifting gender roles, the possibilities are endless. If you enjoyed exploring the changing landscape of love on screen, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more captivating insights. Share your thoughts. How do you think the future of romance in films will unfold? Let's continue the conversation in the comments below.